Hi, this is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6, Delta Alpha Yankee, and for today's video I'm going to do something I have not done in a while, and that is review a Baofeng radio. And for today we're going to be talking about the Baofeng UV-9R Pro. Now what prompted me to do this out of nowhere? Well, we got this radio as well as a UV-S9 Plus in so that we could apply some pouches to it, because these are both, I'm starting to hear more and more about these radios. I'm starting to see them being used, so we thought, hey, let's offer some pouches for these. So we grabbed a couple in so we could fit some pouches to them and offer some models specifically for these radios. And when I got these in, it's been a while since I messed with any Baofengs. I haven't really messed with the Baofeng since the AR-152, which continues to be an interesting and intriguing radio. I'm actually getting ready to do another video on this about some stuff that I've learned recently on it. But getting back to these, I was not terribly impressed with the UV-S9 Plus, and I'll be doing a review on this later and kind of explaining why that is. But the UV-9R Pro really got my attention. As soon as I pulled it out of the box and put it together, I went, hey, this is interesting. And I'll tell you why it's interesting. Again, $28 for a UV5R. The S9 Plus, which they're trying to make the successor to the UV5R, I don't think that's going to happen, and I'll mention why in the review, also $28. Okay? Neither one particularly special, no weather protection, not really built all that. I mean, this one's built more solid than a UV5R is, but they still have that cheap toy-like feeling. So both 28 bucks. This radio right here retailed for $30.99. So 31 bucks. That is $3 more expensive than a UV5R. But what you get in this radio for that extra $3 represents such an intense value that I had to talk about it. Because now $31 on Amazon, and I've seen that price for a while now. They've kind of been on sale for a good long time. They normally apparently retail for $39.99, but even at $39.99, this still would be such an intense value because, again, internally, really no difference between a UV5R. In fact, most of the Baofeng radios, even the AR-152, basically is a UV5R board in a much bigger chassis with a gigantic, humongous battery on it. So a lot of these Baofengs are all kind of the same radio. They're just put into different chassis. So what it comes down to really is going to be the package that the radio is in. Does that represent any particular improvement or value over another? And in this case, it certainly does. So let's talk in general about the specifications on this. Again, like any other Baofeng, 128 channel dual band analog HT, UHF, VHF. So it comes from the factory, ready to receive and transmit on 136 to 174 megahertz and 400 to 520 megahertz, transmit and receive. I have yet to buy a Baofeng that I've had to unlock. This came ready to go. So what it means is if you want to live that outlaw lifestyle and do GMRS with this too, I'm not telling you to do that, but you could if you needed to. So again, internally, menus are the same, menu options are the same, all of that. But it's the external, it's the case that makes all the difference here. Because when you pick up a UV5R, it has kind of a cheap toy-like feeling. Like I mentioned before, it does not feel substantial, does not feel very solid, feels like it's going to break pretty easily. And in my experience, I've had a bunch of them break, so that is actually a thing. But this, when you pick it up, has a solid, substantial feel to it. It feels very solid. It looks astounding. In terms of appearance, and I know appearance is just appearance, it's purely cosmetic, but it's a good-looking radio. It has a good, solid feel. It feels like it can take a decent amount of abuse. Additionally, and this is the big kicker for me, where it says waterproof radio right there. This is, according to Baofeng, IP67 rated, so that means that it can be submerged in water to a depth of 1 meter for 30 minutes and resist intrusion. We're going to see how that happens. I'm gonna take this thing for a little dunking in a separate video, and we'll test that hypothesis. But from what I've seen, they generally do resist that. In some cases, not the full 30 minutes. All I'm concerned about, to be honest with you, is just, is this good in a solid rainstorm? Can I spray this thing with a hose and really get it good and wet? Will it still work? I'm not even necessarily all that concerned about it being able to be held underwater for any period of time. I'm just concerned about if I take this thing on a hike, or if I take this thing out, on a particularly rainy day, is it gonna come back still working? And I'm pretty confident that this will. Now, this is, and if you're familiar with the newer model Baofengs, you'll probably wonder, how different is this from the original UV-9R, which is still on the market, notable for its digital mobile radio embossing on the front, which it is none of that. It does. I do not know why they have that on there. Maybe at some point they were going to do DMR with this, but this doesn't. But the UV-9R and the UV-9R Pro are pretty much identical. They're identical internally, but they're also identical in terms of the features. The switches are the same. The keys, of course, and the layout of the FPP are different, but still pretty much identical. The covers are identical. The big difference at the top of the radio is the UV-9R actually has this switch protection on the side, and for some reason the Pro does not have that. That's kind of a downside, actually. I like to see that protected, so that's not necessarily a good tick in the benefit of the UV-9R Pro. But I like the way the UV-9R Pro looks over the UV-9R, although I will say I like the UV-9R as well. Up to this point, actually, my favorite Baofeng was a GT3WP. All three basically the same, IP67, submersible, heavy-duty radios. And these are just as good as UV-9R Pro in terms of practical applications. But I will say, if I'm going to let looks tip the scale and win the argument in total, I really like the way this thing looks. If you like your radios having a little bit of color, and there's nothing wrong with that, I'm a sucker for an olive drab radio. One of the main attractive points of the AR-152 is I like that OD. And my personal loadout, in fact, my plate carrier and all of my gear is all olive drab. So, and that goes back to my days when I was in the military. I was in the military so long ago, we didn't even have camouflage. Well, we had camo, but stateside, everybody wore OD. So I developed an affinity for that way back when. But let's now talk specifically. Let's take a detailed look at the UV-9R Pro. And let's go ahead and start at the top of the radio. Of course, we have our volume control on-off switch right here. So you turn that on, and on your radio comes. We have our little flashlight, which is an upgrade and improvement over the little exposed LED on the UV-5R. This one does have a cover on it. Our antenna is kind of interesting. Everyone is probably pretty familiar with the standard Baofeng antenna. That seems to be going away in favor of either this design, or in the case, and this started appearing with the UV-9 Golfs, the GMRS radios. And by the way, there is a UV-9R Pro GMRS that is straight up GMRS radio. But I'm kind of off of that. I'll talk about that in another video. But we'll notice this antenna here. Now, it does screw into a little base here that makes it somewhat different. But you notice the shape of the antenna is not far off from what's notoriously known as the counterfeit Nagoya. For a while, there was a company that was selling these antennas marked Nagoya NA701. This is the first aftermarket antenna I ever bought. I actually bought this back in the day when Ham Radio Crash Course was still called, I think it was called Hashnazi Channel or something, but Josh Nass, he had one of these on a UV-5R, and he liked it a lot, and it worked pretty well, so I bought one, and we both turned out buying counterfeit Nagoya antennas, because Nagoya antennas have a different shape, actually. But the interesting part is, this same antenna now is now popping up as the standard antenna on these UV-9R Pros and the UV-9 Golfs. So I don't know if they came up with an agreement with this company, but I will say this: even though this is a counterfeit Nagoya antenna, this thing actually still works better than the stock antennas, and I did a side-by-side comparison between this and a genuine NA701, and they spec'd out pretty much the same on the antenna analyzer. So these actually aren't bad, they just aren't real Nagoyas. But now it's the stock antenna that comes with the Baofeng UV-9R Pro. So we have our typical SMA. Now, okay, so SMA male on the radio, SMA female on the antenna. Sometimes people they don't specify that, they just say SMA female. Well, which part is SMA female? So what this means in terms of practicality is the center conductor pin for the antenna connection is on the radio side. That's not my preferred arrangement. I prefer to have the center conductor on the antenna itself, so if I bend it or break it, I have to replace an antenna rather than a radio. But it seems most of the inexpensive Chinese radios, they go with this kind of arrangement. So that's the antenna. As far as how well the antenna works, we'll be testing that later to see how this thing specs out. But so far it seems to be doing okay, but I'll give you a more detailed analysis of that down the road. PTT feels good. Make sure this is off. I have had a problem with the UV9 Golf. I have 5 of these, and I have one of them that the PTT has already died on. Fortunately, it does seem to be the different type of PTT that appears on the UV9R, and they do seem to be a different type of switch because they're a little springier. They feel a little bit more solid. Got kind of this wavy surface on it. We have our P1 and P2 buttons. Now, what those do, real quickly, is the upper button here. It's not a Monty button. That just turns on your FM radio. And then our lower button, this is what controls the flashlight. Single press gives you solid. Double press gives you strobe. Third press gives you off. Our little orange button at the top, of course, is our alarm. I'll go ahead and press that and then turn it off. I don't like that alarm, hate that alarm actually, but there you go. It can be useful though, and I have mentioned this in the past. There is a very critical reason why that may be a thing. If you're a hiker and you're injured and you're looking for help and you've called people to your location using your radio, as they get closer, if you need to give them an audible cue as to exactly where you're at and you're tired of yelling and your voice is shot, just hit that button. You got a nice loud alarm plus a flashing light. So it's got a valid purpose for existence. It's just what I don't like about it is people like to play with this, and when you press that, what that's going to do, by the way, is send that same siren out over the air. So we don't necessarily care for that too much. Moving to the front panel. Our buttons here, we have our green buttons, so I'll kind of use this as my, oh, not that one, where's my UV9R? So, menu button there, that's what this is too. The green button is our menu. A single press gets you into the menu itself. Of course, if I want to make a change, so this took us first to squelch, and if I want to effect a change on that, I press it again. I use my up-down arrow keys to change those numbers, press that again, and then if I want to exit, I can press the gray button, which is our exit button, or I can press the PTT and exit out. Of course, our channel control, if we want to move from one channel to another, and let me hold this up so we can see here, we just use our up-down arrow keys, and they're actually not arrows, they're little flattened out things, but they are in the same place and no different than that. Now, talking about our front panel keys, this is sort of a different approach where these are individual buttons. This has kind of this little wave effect going on. It's an attractive looking thing, but really all it is just a fascia cover, and it's covering individual switches, so it does exactly the same thing. And as I mentioned, internally, all things being equal, same stuff. Oh, real quick, by the way, something that I did not mention. So I was talking about the internals, characteristics, analog, 128 channel, on and on it goes. Another thing I didn't mention was output wattage. Just like the UV9R, this is going to output 5 watts on high. There are you will see some advertisements on Amazon where they say this is an 8-watt radio. It's not an 8-watt radio. It's a 5-watt radio. But I will do a power test later. In fact, I'm going to be doing a lot of power tests on radios because something I've I've come to understand recently is very few radios actually put out their stated wattage, including the big name brands. Disappointingly so, actually. There's only one brand I've come across that not only meets but exceeds their output wattage every single time, and that's been Ocean. But more on that later. Your mic. Let me grab something here. So your mic opening is right here. Always critical to kind of know where that's at. I'm okay with that, but if you have a tendency to wrap, if you got really big hands and you wrap your hand around the radio, just understand you can cover that up if you're not careful. I generally like to see it either centered or right here, but just be mindful of that and make sure that your finger isn't covering the mic hole when you're talking. As far as audio goes, as you heard earlier, it's good and loud. It's louder than you expect. It's got a nice speaker on it. A little tinny, a little thin, but we're not exactly going for, full rich bass response on these. You're not going to have any trouble hearing this radio. That is not a problem. Now moving to, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this off at this point. Moving to the side, our speaker mic cover. Let me get a screwdriver here so I can show you what we're dealing with here. Now, if you're used to a UV-9R or a lot of the other Baofeng radios, they feature what's called the K-plug or the Kenwood connector, and it's 2 pins that plug into the side. But because this is an IP67 radio, you have to have this cover. Now, with the cover on, it is IP67, so it's going to resist water intrusion. As soon as you take this cover off on most radios, especially the ones with the pins, it's going to let water in. So what this allows you is instead of having holes on the side where pins actually penetrate into the body of the radio and contact the circuit board, instead what we're doing is we have these contacts here. And what that's going to interface with in terms of a speaker mic, you can see these little pins here on the connector. They're going to contact the contacts on the board here. And how this goes in is you stick this tab in at the top, lock it down, and then screw it down in place. And now we have a speaker mic attached, and it retains its IP67 rating. The downside to this is available speaker mics for this are basically the factory Baofeng or pretty much nothing else. I'm not aware of any of the aftermarket microphone manufacturers such as Com Mountain or Prime. I still don't think they're making any for these. If they are, let me know because I want one. Let me know where you found it. But if you, like me, happen to have a pretty big collection of, let me grab one real quick so I can show you what I'm talking about, speaker mics with K-plugs on them, which I do have a big old box of those. There is an adapter that you can purchase that screws onto the side here and locks in place, makes the same connections. The difference being, get this out of the way here, it has this adapter that you can then plug a K-plug into. And the ones that I've tested seem to work pretty well. It adds a lot of length to your speaker mic. So if I were to actually be running this on a carrier, I would probably go ahead and take some of that length out and zip tie it in place. And I probably would go ahead and tape this connection up to preserve a little bit of the water resistance. Of course, you can still get water into the speaker mic. That's going to be a problem, but you can get water into these connections here pretty quickly as well. But that's out there, and I'll leave a link in the description where I found this on Amazon. Let me go ahead and put this cover back on real quick, and we'll move to the back side of the radio and talk about the battery. Screw that down. Okay, so for our battery, we have our battery latch down at the bottom, and how it comes off is you basically just move that outward and then pivot out. So the battery itself is a 2800 milliamp battery. As far as I know, there is no extendo battery option for this. Now, whereas you can with the UV-9R, one of the genius things about this, but I will say the battery latch itself is weak, so as a reminder, whenever you're putting the battery into a UV-9R, depress the battery latch, then set it in place and then release it. If you drive the battery in there, sooner or later, and I've had it happen 5 times now, this little tab right here will break off. And if that happens, the battery is dead. You could, now excuse me, you could, I suppose, tape it up, but the tape is going to cover the FPP here, but moot point at this. For the UV-9R, there is no extended battery option. Fortunately, the batteries are super inexpensive, so you can carry a decent supply, but it is a lithium-ion battery. Now, let me look at the gasketing here. Actually, there's no gasketing as far as I can, yeah, there's nothing on the battery. No, I don't see a gasket anywhere, but it does appear that this area is pretty much water resistant anyway. So I think it's only gonna make your contacts here, and that's probably IP67 resistant. Well, there is a gasket there. So, all right, enough on that. So that's it there. So to install the battery, you just insert the 2 tabs into the top of the body, press down, and it locks in place. Seems pretty solid. Let me cough for just a second. Sorry. Okay, yeah, that's one of the downsides living in the Central Valley of California. The air quality here is awful. So let's talk for a minute about the belt clip. Now this is the same thing with the UV-9R, the GT3WP, and the UV-9 Golf. All have the same belt clip issue. And you'll note I don't have this stud on any of these radios. And the reason why is I use pouches for these radios. Because this belt clip, this is the one area where Baofeng really made a huge mistake. They should have just put a conventional belt clip on this thing. This thing is awful. So the way this works is there's a stud on the back of the radio. And the idea is this clips onto your belt and stays there. And if you want to secure the radio onto the clip, you just simply slide this stud into that slot. And you heard a little clicking sound there. And it will swivel like so. Now, if you hit it on the bottom, I don't know how much impact it's going to take to actually snap this thing off or break the clip. I don't know. Looking at it, it seems pretty thick. It may be more durable than I think, so I may be speaking too soon. You'll notice a little, or maybe you can see it, there's a little spring there that locks into the center point here. And you know what it looks like? Maybe, I just noticed this. There's a little, because I'm noticing this little spring here, there's a little opening slot here. If I turn this, so I'm just doing this on the fly because I just noticed this. So I'm going to turn this so this aligns with, no, it won't do it. It just kind of only locks in place right there. I thought that little opening there at the bottom would be helpful for sliding through there, but actually there seems to be some kind of a, yeah, for some reason that will not align with the bottom. So let's take this off and see if we can solve that mystery. If it's a mystery for me, it might be a mystery for you. Yeah, okay. So we've got a groove here, and we've got a groove here. So it would appear that this is only meant to go on one way. There's only one way that it'll go, and it seems that offsets just a little bit that way. So I'm spending way too much time talking about this belt clip stud, but I just noticed that. I guess the long story short on this is my recommendation. Oh, goodness. All right, that's excellent. Oh, excellent. Okay, so you got to see a real-time failure right there. I literally could not get it off of the belt clip. So here's what I'm going to suggest you do on this. Is take this off, find the nearest trash can, throw it into that trash can. And shameless promotion time. Go ahead and buy yourself a Specter gear pouch and carry it in that. How about that? Link in the description on where you can find this. But yeah, and even, yeah, that was excellent. I wish I had planned that. I could say I was clever, but I didn't. So yeah, Specter gear pouch is available. So upshot here. We've got a radio that's going to work well enough for recreational purposes and to see if you're going to like ham radio, or it may last you a lifetime. Who knows? But I'm going to say for 31 bucks, this is pretty awesome. If I didn't already have a big old box of these, because altogether I've got 8 radios of this type, now 9 if you add this in. If I needed more of these, or if I was buying for a group, for instance, this radio would definitely be something that that I would lean to immediately. $31 out the door. It's a good, solid design. There's a lot of information about this radio out there in terms of how to program it. And in fact, I have neglected it, but I did have somebody just recently mention to me, hey, you know, these operator series videos that you do for like the Yaesu FT65, and I'm currently doing one for the Yaesu VX6, and I have some others planned. But given the number of Baofengs out there, although there are people that have covered these topics before, might not be the worst idea to do an operator series video for these types of radios, and I might just go ahead and do that to show people how to, you know, program them from the front panel and operate them in the field to make changes and adjustments from the front panel. So I might go ahead and lean into that. But like I said, good looking radio, solid performer. And, you know, just keep in mind there are limitations in terms of the, for instance, the receiver is a direct conversion receiver that doesn't have a heck of a lot of shielding. So in a high RF environment, this radio is going to go deaf on you. There are some things that you need to do on this radio in terms of the squelch settings to make this work a little bit better. I will do a separate video on that. But as far as the best value under $50 currently that you can find, this radio is it. This is the best bang for your buck that you can find at the moment. So with that, I'll go ahead and bring it to a close. Thank you for watching and or listening. This is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6, Delta Alpha Yankee from Visalia, California. Have a wonderful day.